What's up, cyberspace cadets and YouTubers? It's Irate Prostate here, and something a little bit different tonight. This is the inaugural broadcast of what I'm going to call Ice Cream, and that's a treat that we give ourselves every once in a while when we feel like we deserve it. And I've been in a good place. I started listening to some very interesting music by this composer that we're going to talk with tonight. It's an interview. All the ice creams will be interviews with just individuals. It won't be a group setting like what we usually do with the Creem stream. And without any further ado, we're going to start playing with the first tune that's up. You're going to hear three melodies by the cipher. One is called the Beau de Clavier Suite, and the Nightmare is the first one. 8 monologues for piano will be the second. And then to finish it out is Fairy Tale Pictures for Orchestra 3. Passacaille, is that how you say it? Passacaille.
Kai. It's pronounced Passacaille.
All right, thank you. All right, and this is Philip Daniel, the composer, whose music we are listening to at this moment. Well, Philip, tell us about yourself. You're an American, as we were talking earlier.
Indeed, I am an American. It's a pleasure to be here on this live stream. I am largely a self-taught composer. I've been composing since I was 8 years old. It's actually not my primary profession, which is law, but I put a lot of work and study into composing. I am also a pianist, again, largely self-taught at the piano.
So, all right, when I listened to I listened to I think it was, I wrote a list down, and it was like 17 or 18. My wife and I, we have, the television Roku, and I just put on your catalog to play, and we didn't turn it off for at least three and a half hours, and I was really just blown away by the tone that your music sets. The fact is, okay, you're playing what, piano, organ, and what, Clavier? Is that what what kind of orchestration are you using for the filling for the strings and the wind and stuff like that?
Using a combination of 3 sound fonts, which shows you can, I guess, which shows that you can get a smooth and relatively realistic timbre. These sound fonts. I plan, hopefully, within a matter of time, to have some of my more ambitious orchestral and chamber works by real musicians. I think it's about time. I've been steadily networking. I've been work with professional musicians and composers, and hopefully within a matter of time I can have my work performed live. As for the piano work, it's actually not performed by me. It's actually, again, although I'm a fairly competent pianist, I haven't opportunity, given how busy my schedule is, to actually sit down and record my own compositions. I also need access to a really good piano, which I do not have at the present time. I guess I'm rather fortunate to have developed a good ear to the extent where I can compose in silence without access to a piano, but
that's amazing. I mean, it really is mind-blowing that because your stuff really sounds so. When I say stuff, please don't be insulted by that. I mean your work, your art, because it's. I do have a degree in painting and sculpture, and so I know how when I speak of this, I'm speaking of your music, and I don't mean any disrespect at all by using that term. It's just it's just for simplicity for my sake. But so when I was listening, my wife and I were listening. We started talking, and we started talking about like the Phantom of the Opera, and this music evokes that kind of like the music of the Phantom himself, actually. And she my wife Uzuki, she pretty much was telling me, that this is the type of music that she would always hear, and she had seen, Andrew Lloyd Webber's version, and of course the movies that, I had shown her. So I thought that was very interesting, because there is kind of this haunting, and yet like it's a quality that doesn't put you off, right? Some haunting tunes or dissonant notes or stuff can be can render negative emotions, but with me, it seems like your music wants me to ask questions of it, and it's more like a dialogue you have with the listener, especially the Nightmare. I really found this to be one of my favorite of your works, and that's kind of what I wanted to kick off with it. Are you a fan of horror or any of the Gothic type genre? The old Gothic poetry or some of the books maybe from the Gothic age.
Well, to some degree, yes. I consider myself to be a neo-romantic, and in my own work I try to find an equilibrium between expression and craftsmanship. If the expression, even if the emotionality is overwrought and overbearing, I try to craft my work with as much precision as possible. I put a great deal of emphasis on counterpoint, on harmony, and my own approach to counterpoint and harmony is influenced by composers like Max Reger, a late Romantic, early modern South German composer who was very prolific, who composed a great deal of work for organ, piano. He composed a great deal of chamber music and orchestral music. He composed choral music, and his work too. His work tends to have a very strong Gothic or neo-Gothic strain. It tends to, it's in that way a model for my own work. It finds a balance between that very rich and sensuous late Romantic harmony and near atonality, where the tonal scheme is taken with extreme, and the use of chromatic harmony is taken to the point of almost an unstable point. But as for Gothic literature and Gothic film, when I was younger, I haven't consumed as much of it recently. I have been into the symbolist painters. I have been getting into the pre-Raphaelite painters like Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and I think some of their themes have influenced my work, and like them again, I aim to be a craftsman, to be expressive, and to plumb certain psychological depths in my work. But I do think too one of the most important attributes or functions of music is the expression of the sublime, which can be considered a type of beauty, I guess. The transcendence that you are a different plane entirely, and I aim for that in my music, and that's something I think that Gothic art also aims for. I'll aim to evoke terror in some works. I'll aim to evoke a feeling of majesty in others, or I'll try to evoke a sense of others. So I aim for diversity of affect, diversity of expression in my work, certainly. But I'm very pleased that you enjoyed The Nightmare. I feel like I put into that suite in general, the Clavier suite, as unconventional as it is. I feel like I put a lot of effort into that work. It's very close to me, actually.
Well, and the fact that you married it with like the Fuseli, the classic Fuseli painting, the Nightmare. I thought that was a perfect combination. It's the imagery. When you talk about the classical romanticists and painters with and the Gothic the Gothic aspect of romanticism, affecting that art. I think that surely is definitely comes through in especially right now. We've gone into the 8 monologues for piano, and this work is I thought it was more subtle. But it's almost sounds in parts like it's supposed to be an echo or a memory of some type. I don't know. These are just things that I think when I listen to it, and I've always been drawn and attracted to the Gothic, to horror, and to the romantic aspect of the loss of beauty, when at the moment of death. I don't know. This is like the one of those conversations where we're probably both gonna at the end of the hour we're both gonna say, shit, I wish I should have said this or wish I should have said that. But there's so much that comes to my mind, when I actively listen to your music. I really, really, really like it. I'm a big, fan of like novelists like Edgar Allan Poe, and of course, H.P. Lovecraft. Were you ever exposed to any of their works?
I was exposed to Poe from a very young age. As for Lovecraft, I've only started getting into his work, and in some ways, it's still something very, but it's something with an appeal that grows after a certain period of time. I just want to go back to something you said about my 8 monologues, that they felt like that they seemed to like a series of intimate memories.
Right, exactly.
A series of reminiscences.
Right. You want to extract? Go ahead.
Spot on with what I was going for in that series of 8 pieces. I was aiming for, in most of them, a sense of melancholy and nostalgia, and a certain degree of restraint in expression. Although there are certainly points of climax in these works, obviously. I feel that I personally peaks with the 5th of the monologues, which is a nocturne at an old castle, which is the longest of the pieces, and happens to have a melody which I am quite proud of. It has it's somewhat of the melodies of Rachmaninoff, but and find something with it. Yeah, that you come across a melody in your work that you really become attached to, and that's one that I feel very attached to. The one that makes up the bulk of the middle section of that nocturne.
So, right. So, if I understand correctly, then what you're saying is this is kind of an homage to the Rachmaninoff, right? Maybe.
I was speaking in particular reference to the middle section, the B section that makes up that of the 5th one of the 5th of the monologues, but the entire set is a set of neo-romantic character pieces, but unlike neo-romantic character pieces that are in nowadays, I try to avoid the new age cliches that have seeped into this music and try to come. I try to attain something more authentic.
Right, that's interesting.
Which I think can only
Please keep going.
come through a very close study of music of that period, from the middle of the 19th to the first through the first quarter of the 20th century and even beyond. So, something that I would recommend to young composers is to study as many scores as you can, silence, and study them while listening to the music itself. Both are very useful ways of internalizing and you can learn from doing this regularly. There's so many subtleties in harmony and counterpoint that aren't necessarily taught in an overview class. But if you to the masters and the not so masters closely, you can learn a great deal.
Right. So, are you talking about like looking at the music itself and while you're listening to it and read the music with
yes.
Along? Okay. That actually makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because you pick up nuances, maybe certain little signature notes, endings. You know, the way that they'll accent a phrase or some subtle stuff like that. That's what's going to pop out in the written form, is what I believe. And right, and then when you're listening to it, your ear will tune more to hearing that. That makes a lot of sense. It really does. So, who are some more of your favorite composers?
The apex of the Western musical canon would be Johann Sebastian Bach. I know that seems to be very common among composers and musicians. But with him, it's just the fact that he represents a summation of everything that came before, the most perfect summation, although he's not a perfect composer, the most perfect summation of everything that came before him, and in many ways an antecedent of what came later.
Well, and I don't think there's anybody that's I don't think there's anybody that that's not that anybody that's like. What I'm trying to say is any normal person that no matter what kind of music that they listen to, they'll be able to identify a Bach when they hear it. They may not know that it's Bach, but they know the piece because his stuff is so iconographic, of the era. And like you said, I agree. I love Bach myself. It's just beautiful work. A lot of his work. I love the piano. I really love the piano. Occasionally, I love works in cello, my mind's losing it. Piano, pipe organ, some stuff. There was a piece that we listened to, and I can't remember which one it was. That was it sounded like a full pipe organ. Do you have access to one?
Fortunately, I do not. So I've had to rely on sound fonts for that. But I've written a number of chorale preludes for the organ, and of course, a chorale prelude is a work that precedes the singing of a hymn or a chorale in a church, in which the melody of the tune is given some sort of special treatment.
Is this the one, the Vom Himmel hoch?
Yeah.
That was, man. That's exactly the one I was thinking of. It was just a beautiful pipe organ sound to it, and it was. It reminded me. I'm going to talk a little bit about modern composers, and in the 70s there was this era of what they called the art rock era, and it was pretty much, I think it was the tip of the spear was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I am a big fan of composer and keyboardist Keith Emerson. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but
Yes, I'm somewhat familiar with Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. I heard Tarkus a couple months ago, and that was an exhilarating experience.
wasn't that a fantastic? That's my favorite album. Fuck, I didn't know that. I didn't know you had heard that. That's amazing.
Uh,
Yep.
only have I won't call it a neoclassical streak, but there's this healthy respect for the classical tradition in their work to the point where they improvised fugues,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
the numbers, which is pretty extraordinary for rock music. Less extraordinary for jazz, but extraordinary for rock.
Right, and that's what I was gonna kind of delve into is like they had a way of combining jazz, classical, and then rock into I think it was a perfect balance. And in Emerson, in his even in his compositions afterwards in his solo stuff that it just I don't know, that's just something that popped in my mind. Also when I was listening to your music because. I think that there's a longing in music to connect its history with its present, and I think that you're doing a really good job of doing that with your own music. Is keeping that keeping the torch lit, in for lack of a better phrase, for romantic music. Um, All right. Are there
Any other questions you?
Oh yeah. I've got one here. I was like, are there any composers that you think are just completely overrated and you have no idea why people listen to them because everybody does.
I'm not too fond of Hector Berlioz. It's Harold in Italy and Symphonie Fantastique. So some of his work, like his great Requiem, are rather powerful, but for all his strengths in orchestration, he could be rather clumsy in terms of form and harmony. And another composer that I find to be overrated, and many would actually agree with me on this one, is Edward Elgar. Though much of his work again is beautiful, he tended have a very narrow expressive range, which is a problem.
Right.
I won't say Frédéric Chopin is overrated, but I feel that Chopin did not quite live up to his potential, even given his short life. Composed mostly for the piano, and so much of his work was salon music. Although a great deal of his so-called salon music is rather profound and craftsmanlike, and but I won't say he's overrated, but it's really unfortunate that.
When you say salon music, do you mean it's more like it's commissioned by like a family or something that's
Right, yes, where it's sort of background pleasure, where it's sort of disposable and has real value besides the aesthetic value.
Right. So, like, it means really nothing really to Chopin or to the musician.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I would not say that. It's not that Chopin's overrated. I just feel that other composers of his generation didn't quite live up to their potential. Even these composers, there were some composers who lived short lives. Now, by contrast, I think a composer like Felix Mendelssohn, who likewise lived a short life, managed to something in virtually every field of musical endeavor. So, and at a very high level of quality, of craftsmanship and expression. So, the contrast composed like Mendelssohn with one like Chopin, although they're both greats.
Right.
One can see.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, well, during that era, it was being a classical musician. It was like, you know, people would take them under their wing. They would, they would be patrons. You know, kind of like what they're trying to do nowadays with, with Patreon or something like, like that. But they would literally give the composer a place to stay. They would commission them works, so they could live, and we don't have that luxury nowadays. Artists, if they want to create, sometimes they have to starve, or they can't give their complete attention to their art because they're too busy, in the real world making a living.
Artists have never quite had the luxury to devote all their time to their art, and it just so happens that, as you pointed out, the best composers and some of the composers who might not have been the best would have managed to obtain patrons, steady stream of income from commissions, as you pointed out. Those would have had to enter academe. They would have had to teach.
Right.
And so that would have been one of the primary sources of income. Some may have been independently wealthy, and some would have been buried in unmarked graves. So it's a spectrum, you could say.
It looks like
spectrum historically.
Yeah, in the chat, I'm reading the chat, and this is very interesting. Is it okay if I call you Philip? Okay. Let's see. The Incredible Aspie, who's I consider a strong acquaintance on YouTube, says ask you your opinion of Liszt's concert exudes. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's
concert etudes. He meant to write etudes, but that's understandable. Now, I first have to give some background on what an etude is. An etude is a study. It's a piece meant to develop some area of a performance technique. The period is that etudes became not merely a vehicle for developing technique, but a vehicle for expression in the romantic mold. And so Franz Liszt and Friedrich Chopin and Charles Valentin Alcan and other composers of that generation would combine the virtuosity of technique with virtuosity of expression. And as far as Liszt is concerned, Liszt has never been one of my favorites, but I'm not familiar with every version of his etudes because he wrote multiple versions of the same sets of etudes. I prefer Chopin's etudes. I think Alcan's minor key etudes as well. With Liszt is that he has a reputation for, in his early works through his middle period, of writing very diabolical works and having and he had a very Gothic strain to his work. He was influenced by Dante's Inferno, for instance. He wrote 3 books of impressions. He wrote three books of piano pieces which were impressions based on his travels to Switzerland and to Southern Europe. So programmatic strain to his work, and but in his late work, in his later work, he went avant-garde, and his textures were pared down. He would experiment with the whole tone scale, for instance, with unusual exotic modes, and even anticipated atonality, or the lack of a tonal center in some of his very late compositions, which more into those and see what I can glean from them.
Yeah, there's another question here, and this is from Taps. He wants to know what you think about Claudio Monteverdi.
Monteverdi is a very important composer. He straddles the between the Renaissance and the early Baroque. He was one of the first composers of opera. He was a spectacular composer of madrigals, or of unaccompanied works for voices. He was a consummate composer of contrapuntal work, of work involving multiple melodic lines at the same time. is really what distinguishes Western classical music from other art music traditions. With Monteverdi, work it's harmonically at one end it's harmonically simpler than much later work, but on the other hand, the common practiced tonality, the functional harmony that we come to expect, where one sort of chord follows another sort of chord, hasn't yet. And so we have often this floating modality, which you hear in earlier music, where the harmony is not entirely functional. Point A isn't always leading to point B, and I find that interesting. And it's really only with the music of Arcangelo Corelli at the end of the 17th century and his concerti grossi and trio sonatas and violin sonatas that we have the real codification of functional harmony, again, where chord A leads to chord B within chord B within a harmonic structure, an underlying harmonic structure. In Monteverdi, we have a composer who's got elements of two different musical worlds, the modal and the tonal, and I find it very interesting.
That brings me to this question. All right. Obviously, you'd like to use titles in your works that kind of indicate, what perspective musically and philosophically, I guess. I don't know if that's a good word for it, but musically, like the octatonic psychoharmonic entity.
That was just a demonstration of a chord or a hyperchord that I had constructed out of every note of the octatonic scale. The octatonic scale is actually an 8-note scale, of which there are 3 transpositions or 3 different versions, which alternates a whole tone and a half step, which alternates a whole step and a half step. So for instance, to give the would be C, D flat, E flat, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C.
Okay.
One version of C octatonic, and I had built a widely spaced hyperchord out of that pitch series or scale. Now, how that would be used, what function it would serve within a larger piece, would take a great of theorizing and a great deal of experimentation. So it's something that I might future, but a very useful exercise to try to build these harmonies out of these exotic modes and scales, which are seldom, which was seldom used in concert music until fairly recently. It's really only with the Impressionists at the turn of the 20th century that you see these exotic scales and modes becoming a staple of musical composition. Although in earlier music, the ecclesiastical modes, the Ionian, the Dorian, the Phrygian, the Lydian, and the Aeolian, and the Locrian wasn't used, but those church modes or ecclesiastical modes formed the basis of first plain chant or Gregorian chant, and later early polyphony, all through Palestrina and De Lassus, all through Monteverdi into the 17th century. And even Johann Sebastian Bach wrote modal chorales. But again, the non-major, non-minor modes or scales were sort of fell into decline after the Baroque and were only revived, it seems, by the Impressionists, the Russian symbolists, the late Romantics, who saw value in exploiting these scales as a traditional tonal paradigm of the tonic dominant polarity started to collapse in the middle of the 19th century with the work of Wagner and others who stretched the tonal system to its limits.
That's an amazing. I have a basic, working knowledge of tonal scales and kind of how that operates. So I know that that title indicated that there was, you know, there was kind of a unique quality to the music that you're not going to hear in most music because, you know, what type of tonic scale are most symphonies or, you know, most stuff that like Americans would be used to. That's basically it's built on a standard scale, isn't it?
Well, the standard scales of common practice, Western classical art music, are the Ionian or major and the Aeolian or minor. But among the minor, you have the harmonic minor and melodic minor, which are typically used. Now, those are the scales in which with which people are most familiar. Although you hear a lot of Lydian in film music, and the Lydian is like the major, but with a sharp four, a sharpened fourth degree of the scale. So, for instance, to give an example, C Lydian would be C D E F sharp instead of F natural. C D E F sharp G A B C Lydian, and that's said to have a more floaty and stable but dreamy quality to it, as compared to our normal major. And I've used that scale quite a bit. But then there's also another mode that I've been exploring called the Lydian dominant, which is also called the acoustic scale, which is a combination of the Lydian and the Mixolydian. The Mixolydian being like the major, but with a flattened seventh, which changes the whole character of the scale. It changes the dominant tonic relationship of the scale or mode. So the Lydian dominant starting at C would be C, D, E, F sharp, G8, B flat, C. And in fact, the first movement of my Sinfonietta for strings, the dithyrambo, the first movement theme set, the first chord you hear is built from every pitch of the C Lydian dominant or C acoustic scale, which also happens to be the fourth mode of G melodic minor. So if you start G melodic minor at C Lydian dominant, which is why I end that movement in G minor, by the way, because of the interrelation of the two scales. Because they share the same pitch series, they just start on, they have different tonal centricity, they're centered on different tonic note.
Yeah,
I really do think that there's a lot that can be done with these that hasn't really been done yet with these unusual modes, and that you can still get a work within a tonal framework with these scales. You can still achieve that desired polarity, feeling of structural dissonance and the structural tension and release. So for a successful composition, I think that can be achieved even with these unusual scales and modes.
Yeah, when you mentioned the Sinfonetta for strings, that was one of the works that you know, we noticed it stood out, right, when we were listening to it the other day, and I had to look it up and
massive work.
Yeah, it was you know, it was one of those that I said, wow, I really love this, and I wrote it down. And another one, I think that I understand exactly what you're saying here, okay, and this is I've got it listed in 10th. I don't know why, but it says detuned piano improv post Pulitzer 2018, and
I'd rather not talk about that one. I was playing on a piano that's extremely out of tune, so I got some interesting sonorities out of it.
Well, you know, it's like what I liked about it is that it sounded like a very strong statement on. You know, when the instrument is not tuned, the music is not going to come out. I don't know how to explain it, but I think what you were trying to say in that piece came out to me as a comment about you know, this year's Pulitzers, man, and I thought that was a very courageous statement. So I really like that piece. you know, a lot of people may listen to it, but I like the sound. It was a was that an actual upright piano, or were you still using the
An upright piano that has not been tuned in ages.
yeah.
Oh,
I love the sound of it though. That piano has got a lot of potential.
Consistently flat by a considerable number of cents. I think it's almost much of it is almost a complete, which is very interesting. It can be very disturbing while you're playing it to hear what's not actually being played. If you know what I mean.
Exactly. Like you hit an F and you hear like an A flat or whatever. You
hear an E, or you hear not quite an E, but not quite an F. You hear microtonal pitches.
Yeah,
well,
that was something I had taken notes on. That I thought you would you might want to talk about. What about all right? It seems like your work is starting to take this turn into your like it seems like to me coming from past forward is that your music is becoming more focused and you're becoming more confident in like the in where you want to go with it. Where do you want to take your music in the next in the next year, in the next 5 years, next the rest of your lifetime? What would you like to see?
I'm not expecting this to become a vocation or a full-time career anytime soon. But I hope that I can reach a great deal of people with my music. I hope that I can get some of it, at least some of it performed live and perhaps some of it published as well. And I just hope I can make an impact on the musical world. I feel that we are currently living in a cultural desert, and so something needs to be done about it.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree.
Time that we see the pendulum swing back towards craftsmanship, towards a balance between respect for tradition and a Faustian spirit of exploration, a renewed interest in the Western art music tradition.
That's kind of nifty because I was, because there's this 4K level of the 4K introduction into television or into movies and things. It's got to a point to where CGI is now being thrown out in favor of the old ways of doing things because the 4K is such a tight and such a revealing I can't think of the word, but it's a quality of clarity of picture, right? And so I think that at some point this reliance on technology and digital technology primarily will reach a point, and that pendulum is going to swing the other way, like what we're starting to see in the movie industry, like what I was just talking about. And I agree with you. If you got anything that you're working on right now that you're having problems with, or that you would like to talk about, something you're really excited about?
About the current moment in time, I have a lot of other responsibilities, but I'm going back and revising many of my earlier works. I'm cleaning up the scores. I intend to create a portfolio out of them.
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
I still have some incomplete projects that I will be revisiting soon.
Well,
that's as much as I have to say.
Yeah, well, everything that's been uploaded this past at least these past 2-3 weeks has just been really just some really inspirational stuff for me. I really dig it. Just getting on the gut level. It's the type of music that it's like I said, it's kind of creepy in a way, in a good way, to where it's like don't take this the wrong way, but it's like that haunting, that sound upstairs that makes you want to go upstairs and see what's making that sound that's scaring the shit out of you. And then this music, just encourages me to listen to it more and more. And I really love the quality that you're able to get out of that. I think that's a special gift that I'm excited to see what the next year, 5 years will bring in your music. And I would love to see you get published. I think this is just as worthy as anything else I've heard. Out there, and I'm being completely honest when I say that. This is the reason I started this whole ice cream thing, was because of listening to your music, and I said this is something that I always wanted to do, was to take artists or creative people and talk about their creation and their creative process. Is there anything process-wise? Let's maybe spend a minute or two on that. Is there any type of meditation, or what do you do to get in a mind frame to start writing?
Come to me spontaneously. I do have to work them out to some degree. But as for getting into the right frame of mind, I just get into the right frame of mind. I force myself to work. I just engage in the process of composing, and it might be tough to get on a sure footing at first. I ultimately come through.
So do you schedule your time to where you've got a certain amount of time set aside each day to work on music?
Well, for a while I did, but as of the current as of the current time, I have less time. So, but yes, I do try to assign a certain portion of the day to working on my music.
Okay, well, you know what? We've got 10 minutes till the top of the hour. As a matter of fact,
Minutes.
The fairy tale pictures should start playing in a minute or two, as we wrap out the 8 monologues for piano. And how does that open, so we'll know that? Is that piano, or is it orchestral? I didn't get a chance to listen to it before I.
Piano and orchestra.
Okay, cool. All right.
But it's an unusual orchestra that includes 2 harmoniums.
Oh, all right. Explain to everybody what a harmonium is. That's an interesting instrument.
Again.
Say that again, please.
It's smaller than. Match that.
So it's like a small organ.
It's like a small organ, but it's a reed instead of a pipe organ. Oh,
okay.
It may as well be called a reed organ.
Okay. Does anybody? All right.
Played one, but I just fell in love. I fell in love with the timbre of it, so I decided to use it. It typically doesn't have a pedal board like a normal organ. It's a fairly recent invention. Much in Western classical music, though. You do hear it in jazz. You hear it in some modern music. Plays with pipe organ with some repertory. you do interestingly hear it in a lot of in the Indian subcontinent, obviously tuned differently because of the nature of Indian ragas.
Right.
And it's sort of fallen out of use to some degree. They're still played and they're still manufactured. Quite the harmonium or reed organ isn't quite as possible as it used to be. Happened to like its timbre and sonority, so I incorporated it.
What is the name of that instrument that I think Benjamin Franklin invented, where it was like this spinning thing, and it's got like crystal, and you wet your fingers and you play. God, what is that thing called? It's a really beautiful instrument. I've always loved the sound of like crystal glass, being played. Especially by somebody that's really, really good at it, because it's got that, that the way it's just it's almost like it comes and fades away, and the notes are really I don't know. I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to describe. But you know what I'm talking about? Like
yeah, you're talking about the glass harmonica.
Exactly. That's what it is. That's it. And I've always just loved instruments like that produce that type of sound, and I hear it a lot in your work. So that's something else that draws me. All right. Yeah. Tap says great stream. I love this kind of stream. Well, thanks, Taps. We hadn't met, and I would like to meet you. Let's see. He says, and Taps, he's a classical French horn player. He's a jazz-trained trumpet player, and he's he's a film scoring student, and he's has a second jury in about a week.
How does work?
Yeah. So it's here's to kicking some ass on that. The fairy tale pictures just began. I'm going to turn this up a little bit so everybody can hear it. Is that all right?
No.
And you said it's Passacaille? I can't.
Passacaille, that's the French word for Passacaille, which is a type of dance in triple meter. Series of variations over over a repeating ostinato bass or a repeating harmonic progression. It reached its apex during the Baroque. Later during the Romantic, the last movement of Brahms's Fourth Symphony is actually a Passacaille. This one.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is a great piece.
Surfaced during that period.
Yeah, I think it was a wise choice. We switched this out for the other. Very much so. I mean, the other piece is really good too, but this has got it's got a certain freshness about it. So, all right, everybody. So this is what we're listening to is Philip Daniel. I've got his description and his channel in the description. If you're please subscribe to his channel. His music is being used with license and permission. And if you want to use any of his music or anything, you must get written permission from him. Okay. Because I definitely want to put this on for anybody that might see this later. I think that Philip has got a lot to say musically, and I think he's somebody to keep an eye out for. Philip, is there anything you'd like to say before we
just want to say it was a pleasure being on this stream. It was a pleasure speaking with you. We had an excellent conversation. Hope to speak with you again sometime. And have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your week and the rest of and your weekend. And as for any musicians, any composers watching this stream, good luck with your efforts. And remember, work hard, study hard.
And that's sound sage advice. As we listen to this, I think we're just going to let the music take us out. If you're okay with that, Philip, I'm gonna turn us down and turn it up. All right.